Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Alexander Povetkin has expressed an interest in fighting the winner of Dillian Whyte or Derek Chisora next year. So there's a Sky Sports article which I'll briefly touch on because it's quite brief in the actual information. But it's a good springboard to talk about Alexander Povetkin and the what next for him, because beyond Whyte, beyond Chisora, there's some other names that I think people would like to see him in against. And by the way, if you can hear some background noise here, it's absolutely hammering down with rain here in New Zealand at the moment where I am. So yeah, apologies for that if it is a distraction or the video sounds a bit different to normal. In terms of Alexander Povetkin and the what next, you can see the Sky Sports article here. Whyte vs Chisora 2, Alexander Povetkin keen to fight Dillian Whyte or Derek Chisora next year. And based on the strength of this article, which is it's pretty thin overall, they've obviously cast out there just to sort of see what they can get back. Because remember, Povetkin spoke about wanting to fight in London in April of next year. And what's happening in April of next year? Well, there's a certain pay-per-view event scheduled for Wembley, 100,000 people. Anthony Joshua versus TBA. Alexander Povetkin would be a very good addition to that undercard. There's been some speculation that the Wembley card might be scrapped in favour of fighting Jarrell Miller. I just don't see it. It's the only card, the only time that they can get a card at Wembley in all of 2019. But in this story, so it says, Russian contender Povetkin brutally beat David Price in Cardiff earlier this year before losing to Anthony Joshua at Wembley. Povetkin now 39, 2 defeats, still has the appetite for a major outing. And before I carry on, Povetkin has said publicly he's got 1 or 2 more fights in him. He's 39 now. So those 1 or 2 fights, he wants them to be a major outing, because this is all legacy building stuff now. And it's all, you know, money making stuff too, because he wants to be in big fights that pay decent money. And if it can be on the big stage, the world stage, well, that's all the better. And that's why I think the Anthony Joshua undercard could be very appealing, because it's on pretty much the biggest stage in world boxing. There's not many bigger cards out there that he could fight on. In terms of the what next, his plan, Sky Sports were told, is return in March or April with the UK, Russia or the USA possible locations. Povetkin's interest in meeting Whyte or Chisora, who settled their grudge match on Saturday, could bring him back to British soil for a 3rd consecutive time. His interest in boxing in the first quarter of 2019 makes him an option for the undercard at Wembley on April 13th, when Joshua is expected to fight. I would just note that April is not in the first quarter of the year. It's actually in the second quarter, but we can overlook that little faux pas there. What else is in the story? There's not too much. It talks about the Dillian Whyte on Povetkin, good strong fighter, yada yada yada. But I want to go back to this piece here about Russia, the USA, or April, March in the UK. And if we start with the USA first, because I was thinking about this, I was like, what could Alexander Povetkin do in the UK? What are the options there? Because remember, he's not tethered to Matchroom. He doesn't have to fight for them. That's just an avenue. You know, he can go, you know, to the UK, he can fight on a Matchroom card, or potentially go to the United States and fight on a DAZN card, but there's other options out there. There's Top Rank, and Top Rank's now got Kubrat Pulev. Kubrat Pulev is saying he wants to have a decent fight. He wants to, you know, keep busy, stay active before he gets his title shot. And it's probably a stretch to think that Pulev and Povetkin could meet. But I was thinking about this as being one of the fights that should have happened in the past decade, because Povetkin and Pulev have been 2 of the stalwarts of the division, guys who've been in the top 10 for a long time now. They've been there or thereabouts for so long now. It's a shame that this fight has never happened, because, you know, that'd be an interesting fight. Kubrat Pulev would be the taller man. Povetkin obviously very dangerous, powerful, sharp. Pulev a very good technical boxer, good jab, and he certainly knew how to handle Hughie Fury in his most recent outing. Maybe that's a stretch to think that fight could happen, but if he was to fight in the US, who would it be? That was just one name that came to mind now that Pulev is with Top Rank. I guess another guy you could look at is Bryant Jennings, but I guess as well, Jennings has got designs on a title shot maybe that's just not going to happen. But Jennings and Povetkin, another very interesting fight. And Povetkin would have to overcome some of the challenges that he came up against Anthony Joshua in the Pulev fight and the Jennings fight, being the smaller man, the smaller reach. And with Jennings, an 84-inch reach, Povetkin's 75-inch reach, that's a massive differential. But as we know, Povetkin, he can close the distance quite well. And also Jennings, he likes to fight up close. But beyond those couple of names, and, let's take Deontay Wilder out of the mix, that's not going to happen. And probably take Jarrell Miller out of the equation because he doesn't want to face anyone that represents any risk right now. They're talking about him fighting in January at 3 or 4 weeks' notice. It's not going to be anyone good. He's just going to limp his way to a title because he doesn't want to lose the O and lose the payday that comes with being able to sell that in a title fight. But other options are Russia. I was thinking about this. If he does have 2 fights total, perhaps a third, maybe a stretch, a Russian fight with Sergey Kuzmin, that would make a lot of sense because Alexander Povetkin is still the number one. He's the number one in Russia. He's sort of been the number one in Russia for some time. You've had some other guys that were around, Fedosov, Ustinov, and Sergey Kuzmin has emerged more recently. He turned pro a couple of years ago. He's been working his way up, and he is kind of the heir apparent at this point to become the number one eventually. He's part of the same team, World of Boxing, that Povetkin is part of. So I kind of thought, well, a passing of the torch fight between 2 Russian contenders, because Kuzmin is working his way into contender territory now, it would naturally make a lot of sense, especially as it's an in-house fight for World of Boxing. It makes a lot of sense for them to run that at some point. Maybe not next, but if Povetkin has a second fight or a third fight to round out his career, I think they should do that. It would make a lot of sense. And Kuzmin, he would have a very good chance in that fight, especially the older that Alexander Povetkin is getting. He's not going to get any better. But if we're talking about the UK, March or April, well, April represents a Wembley date. March, well, who knows? But there are a number of potential suitors that we could look at for Alexander Povetkin. I've heard a number of names uttered in different recent comment sections in the past couple of weeks, all of which are really good matchups. Maybe the most far-fetched of them all is Alexander Povetkin and Luis Ortiz. It's a very good fight, but I just don't see it happening. Just because of the promotional situation, Luis Ortiz would have to be in the Matchroom stable to actually get that fight, I think, because it would be on a Matchroom card. Eddie Hearn's not going to be doing Luis Ortiz any favours if he's outside of the tent. And we have to remember, there's not going to be really anything on the line for that sort of fight anyway. It'd just be a really, really good fight between 2 top contenders. 2 guys who are probably number 4 and number 5 in the division. You can mix around those 2. I mean, I know Deontay Wilder says Luis Ortiz is number 2 or number 3, but in my view, he's either number 4, number 5, somewhere around there. I do have him as one of the best contenders in the division, as do I Povetkin. I think Povetkin is still a very good fighter. He's got one of the deepest resumes in the entire division. You can't overstate it. Go have a look at BoxRec and see the litany of names that are on there. It's very impressive. He doesn't really take too many cherry-pick fights. Generally, it's mostly sort of solid contenders for the past decade. Other names that have been featuring recently where Alexander Povetkin's name has been mentioned, Joseph Parker. A lot of people would like to see Joseph Parker and Alexander Povetkin. And that would be a very interesting fight, and probably a 50-50 fight. Alexander Povetkin, he can box, he's quick, and I think Joseph Parker would have some issues with him, but at the same time, Parker's style with his movement and his speed, he would certainly stand a very good chance in an Alexander Povetkin fight. I think that one would probably go to points. And being in the UK, 2 neutral fighters, I mean, who knows who could get a decision there? It would really depend on the quality of the work landed in the fight. Another name that I've seen mentioned is Alexander Usyk and Alexander Povetkin. That could potentially be Usyk's first fight at heavyweight. And wouldn't that be a statement to jump in with one of the top guys in the division who's been here, done that over the past decade, get in there and potentially beat him? It would certainly announce himself to heavyweight, and people would automatically say, even though some people are saying it now, that Usyk is a top 10 guy, that he is someone who can make some noise in the division, potentially get a belt down the line. He is angling for an eventual shot at Anthony Joshua. He wants to face Joshua, but not quite yet. He hasn't quite decided to make the move up to heavyweight yet. It's all but done, barring the shouting. But he wants to plot a careful path to get there. And it would make sense to, face a couple of guys. Maybe a Povetkin is a good one to start. You'd eventually want to work to some tall timber for Alexander Usyk. Get used to the reach, being able to close the distance, being able to deal with different things that he's not getting in the cruiserweight division. Because most of these guys are, on a par with him in terms of height and reach and that sort of stuff. Certainly he's got the amateur pedigree where he's beaten a whole pile of guys who are doing well in the heavyweight division. But actually at the pro level, it's a bit different to the amateurs. It's a different kettle of fish, and he will need some time to acclimate, in my opinion. But Povetkin versus a couple of other names. Well, we've already seen David Price, been there, done that, got the postcard. There's been potential talk of other guys, like the story from Sky Sports, Dillian Whyte or Derek Chisora, the winner of that fight. The reason why I didn't so much get into that straight away from the list of names, even though it was the hook to get into this topic, I'm not sure I see that happening. Just because, is the money really there? I could see the loser of that fight facing Alexander Povetkin, but I don't see the winner of that fight, which in my view will probably be Dillian Whyte. He will be on to bigger and better things, potentially a title shot or headlining his own event. And if he's headlining his own event, I'm not sure we're going to see him in with Alexander Povetkin, who'd be coming off a loss to Anthony Joshua. Sure, you could get a gauge if they had a fight, do a bit of a triangle theory type situation, especially if Whyte won. But I'm not sure selling the guy off a loss after he was brutally knocked out by Anthony Joshua, I'm not sure if that's a winning strategy. Ideally, you'd want Povetkin having 2 or 3 wins under his belt before having another massive fight in terms of headlining a card in the UK. I think he's more likely to return on an undercard. And that's why some of the names like Parker, Chisora and Povetkin, that'd be a decent fight. Jarrell Miller, he's not going to take that fight. Alexander Usyk, potentially he would. And it would be a good stage for him to do it on, especially to sell himself to the UK market for down the line for Anthony Joshua. Dillian Whyte, like I said, not sure I see that happening. It would be a main event if it was to happen, and it would be a separate event. But I'm not sure that would be the opponent they'd be chucking Whyte in with if he beats Derek Chisora. Ideally, he'd be title bound in his view. Luis Ortiz, as I mentioned, it's a possibility, but it's a bit of an outside chance. Michael Hunter, he's now in the Matchroom stable. Is that a possibility? Michael Hunter versus Alexander Povetkin. And with Hunter's movement and some of the things he does, a bit unorthodox, but he's certainly very effective, that could be quite a fun fight. And I think Michael Hunter, he could potentially be pitted with a number of these guys who are in the Matchroom stable. And another potential opponent for Alexander Povetkin, what about Carlos Takam? He's been working closely with Matchroom more recently. He's fought Povetkin before. That was a pretty decent fight before he was brutally knocked out. That was back in 2014. But at the time, Alexander Povetkin was taking performance-enhancing drugs. But that was legally. He was legally allowed to take some stuff. So there have been some people over the years who've said, Povetkin, he was on the juice at the time. That probably did something for his performance. So if you run that one back, that might be an opportunity for Takam to try and get his revenge on Povetkin. A Povetkin who's a couple of years older than Takam and potentially ripe for the picking. Who knows? But there is a number of options out there, and a lot of them I like. But I think Alexander Povetkin, because, of his history, he only faces, contenders of a certain level. He's not going to be facing, a Tom Little of the world. He's not going to have someone who's a complete soft touch. He'll be in a good fight because that's what he does. That's what his legacy has been built upon. So expect him to make some noise wherever it is. If it's USA, Russia, or more likely the UK. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.